So welcome everybody to today's Tech Talk. We're happy to see you again, or to say hi to those people who are for the first time here. Some people are still joining. Welcome everybody. My name is Andre. I'm the managing director and founder at Lingo Systems. And for those of you who don't know us at Lingo Systems, we are specializing in language technology. So we are helping language service providers as well as enterprises in integrating their systems, in customizing their language technology, in automating the processes, integrating AI components, and so on. So that is our daily business, and we are the ones who are making this tech talk happen. The idea is that all those people who are interested in language technology have a place to exchange their ideas, to talk about current topics. And this is what we want to do today. We have a very interesting speaker here today for this session. But before we start with the presentation, we have prepared a short survey. And it would be great if you could take part in that survey. And Steffen will tell you how this survey works.
I am muted. So, hello everyone. You should now see my screen, and there are two ways to take part in that survey. And I would highly recommend to grab your phone at this point and scan the QR code. The other way is you go to your browser and type in menti.com and type in the code, as you see here on the screen, 8746 8757. Maybe Corinne, you can copy paste the code in the chat that for other people to join, but the easiest way is it to scan the code with your phone, and then you should see the very first slide. You should see Stevan now. You should see him live and on the other screen in your phone, hopefully. Is it working for everybody? Does anybody need the code again? Feel free to let me know. Okay, the first question goes to Corinne. I will share.
So, because, well, I'm me.
So the code, wait, please let me wait a second. One more time the code,
again,
and then
we'll do the code again.
We do the code again, and then we start. Okay. Okay. 5 seconds, and then we continue. I will scan it myself as well again. I'm with you here. Scanning QR code, and we are live. Corinne, it's your part.
So generally, I like to know what kind of people we have here in the Tech Talk. So I always start with an interesting question. So if you were suddenly famous overnight, what would it most likely be for? I will probably be the person that accidentally goes viral on TikTok for doing something weird, like tripping over my cat, or winning a world record, eating the most snacks in one sitting, or becoming an unexpected star in a reality TV show that no one actually asked for, or inventing a bizarre gadget that somehow actually works. I see we have just all...
I like it.
Well, everyone's just creating gadgets here.
Yeah.
I'm now waiting for the gadget market to just take off.
We give them five more seconds for everyone to submit the vote, and then we can start with 5 questions that we and Steven are really interested in. Not that we're not interested in the question here.
It's just me.
That was more Korean part. Okay, I will jump to the next slide here. As a customer, where do you see your biggest translation challenges? Is it at platform level, like TMS functionality or integrations? Is it at LSP service level? Is it the delivery speed, the quality, the consistency? Is it the content preparation and selection part, like source files issues or prioritization issues? Is it maybe the alignment, like terminology and brand voice? Or is it something completely different that you would like to talk with Stevan after the talk about? Feel free to type other. And if there is a lot of other answers, we can then go into conversation as well.
Interesting.
So feel free to vote. Where is your biggest, at the moment, what's your biggest translation challenge? To others, highly recommend to talk to Stevan after. Okay, and wait until like 5 more seconds for you to vote. 4, 3, still moving. I want to interrupt people voting here. Okay, but the platform level is apparently the most challenging part at the moment. Second question. Does your current TMS, can it also be a TBMS, Stevan, cover all your translation needs out of the box? Does it cover everything? Yes, it covers everything I need. Is it no? I need additional integration or connectors. Is it now I rely on manual workarounds, for example, spreadsheets, emails, etc. So now I use external tools for QA, MT, workflows, and so on. Or is it other? We are happy to talk about. No manual workarounds.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, 5 more seconds. Okay, next question. For buyers and localization managers, do you find it difficult to implement changes at content creation level? Is it difficult? Yes. Content teams don't prioritize localization. Is it? Yes, but legacy processes and tools make it a bit difficult. Yes, it's sometimes difficult, depending on the team alignment. Or is it all good and you're involved early in the content strategy? Or are there any other issues? That's difficult. Okay, only the difficult part is moving, Stevan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Until now, there are no real large surprises other than the manual piece being 0. But I'm assuming because everybody wants to move away from it, so it's fine. We're going to have a larger conversation about this at the end anyways, but yeah.
We're happy to.
I'll ask you to bring those slides back once we go through it. Yeah. And I'm assuming people the ones that have an answer can still answer before the end of the
Yeah, you're very we're very happy to get you into conversation with Stevan within the talk, right? Should not wait for the end. Okay, there's another. Perfect. Next question for buyers and LSPs. Grade from 1 to 5, the pressure, like the pressure level, to include AI into your localization workflow. 5 is pressure is high, 1 pressure is low. I'm very curious.
Yeah.
The no pressure or extreme pressure? 4.7, 4.6. I wonder if anybody is not being asked to include AI in localization workflow. Okay, that was expected. Yeah. Last question, I guess. Is the inclusion of AI solely for cost efficiency? If not, what other factors can you think of? Oh, my monitor turned off. Now it's back. Is it for cost efficiency? Is the main driver? Is it only for speed, better turnaround times, maybe scalability, quality improvement, innovation, competitive advantages, maybe data insights? Love that. Very diverse. That's very interesting. Love to tackle that topic later on as well.
Can I assume also the people that answer can only answer one of the? No?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That's why I was looking at scalability. Yeah, when you compare it to the others, I would select others too, being more important and scalable at the beginning. So yeah.
Oh no, sorry, I was wrong. You can. It's multiple choice.
I just wanted to say
Just
they
check.
can choose more than one, actually.
Yeah, I just checked. I checked with my phone here. It's multiple.
Okay. There we go.
I have to confess, I take scalability.
That's fine. It just gives us a general idea. Yeah. Of course.
Okay, Steven, thank you very much for this.
In the chat, Stefan, someone said we didn't offer the answer, but this is also having AR makes us look cool. Which I find is the best answer. I should remember that for the next time.
Yeah. Steven, the stage is yours.
Yes.
And let me know if you need the slides. I will just download them and I will bring them up as soon as you wish.
Will do. I believe you can see my screen and hear me correctly.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so let's look at this. The answers to the slides, the answer to the questions are very interesting. So we will bring those slides at the end. So if you have time to answer during the talk, and if you weren't able to answer at the beginning, there's the QR code in the chat, so you can pick it up and then go and answer. So we can have a more complete set at the end. So we are going to be talking today about how smarter content creation makes localization better. And some of the answers, well, actually, the majority of the answers that I just saw validate this point. Now, I'm going to go through a set of stories here. We're going to actually be discussing a high-level challenges, then some solutions, and then some case studies. So without further, let me just get in first, do a bit of an introduction, and then we're going to go through it. Importantly, I don't want this to be dead by slides, basically, so very interactive. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. Either if I'm looking at my screen and I don't see you, Karine will pick up and then just let me know, but in the middle, so if you have a question about a certain slide, just raise your hand and we'll tackle it right there. If you have a question about a case study, about anything, bring your own opinions. All that is important because that's part of this conversational, that's why it's Tech Talk. So let's move very quickly then to the topics. First, I am to give you an idea of what I do and what I've been. I used to work at I would say small to middle-sized LSP called Dingo24, Scottish LSP. Then we were acquired by Onbabel. Onbabel brought their AI tooling into the mix. Then, of course, you start looking at traditional localization, including LLM components. I've been working on localization strategy creation for large customers somewhat around since 2012. I've been in the localization industry since 2009, and I've mainly been the technical side. So I've done localization engineering, I've done file assessment setups, so DTP, Okapi framework, file structuring, you name it, I've done it before. I've also led teams that do it, I've then led teams of consultants that do localization strategy for large companies. And now I work as the director of integrations within Onbabel. And that has to do with, and we're going to speak about it, interoperability layer for systems, very close to what Lingo Systems does. And also there's now, rather than custom work, there's also platform that do it. So that's my day-to-day in the current localization sphere. So without further ado then, let's look at what we're talking about. I made a statement at the beginning of that, at the beginning of the presentation, saying that smarter content will lead you to smoother localization. That is very obvious, of course, to a certain amount of people. The challenge is not usually, or the challenge will usually not be that smarter content or creating content better leads you to better localization. The challenge is how to create it smarter. And not even how, but actually implementing those strategies within already established enterprises, or if you're an LSP, moving away from the transactional manner into kind of a closed partnership with your customers so they understand that it's on them to change some of their practices for this to be better. What we're going to go through today is the challenges in the traditional localization process, how they've been either improved or challenged by the intrusion of AI. Then we're going to look at some of the solutions that we can think of, some of the applications of this. And this is not about adding AI to it. For me, AI is a facilitator. It's a accelerator, not the solution to the main challenge. That is why the whole thing is about speaking about content. And then, yeah, we're going to see those accelerators in the interoperability layer, how AI helps. And then we're going to go through some Q&A at the end regarding those slides. And again, in the middle, just ask any questions. You can bring your opinions. Just let us know what you think. So let's start. I want to preface this by saying, interestingly, well, for me, interestingly, this is the second presentation I do where all my images are AI created. So I want to bring that to the table because it's interesting. I've generated all of them out of prompts that I created on the basis of my slide deck. And you'll notice small errors, which I left there on purpose. You'll notice things that are not in place. I left that on purpose. But it gives you an idea of how it helps, right? I've created images, I've created setups, but it shows you that it is a very powerful tool, but you need to watch over it. So if you think those images are AI, yes, they are, all of them, with a purpose. So let's look at the traditional challenge of localization. I think the image speaks for itself, but I'm going to go over some of the points. Usually, we've had, high costs. That stems from a myriad of different reasons. Some of them, my view, and this is kind of where this conversation goes, the beginning of the content journey. The challenge here being, if you look at all the issues that are on the slide with traditional localization, and we're going to speak about it in the next slide, you will see that all of them have to do with content, of course, because translation and localization have to do about content. So I can name them very simply. It costs me too much, which stops me from going to new markets, for example, because one market is enough and I cannot afford to go to others if you're the buyer. Slow turnaround, depending on your type of content, the turnaround will take more. It doesn't matter if you include AI or use humans. It has different challenges, but it still goes into turnaround. One that I like too much is different teams within my company do things differently, which happens across the board at buyers. And the reason for that is different teams have different budgets. And the reason for that is localization doesn't exist at a company strategy level, not in all of them. This has to do with, CSA's research maturity, setups, and how the localization process within a given company is mature enough. But what you usually find is that at the middle range, you have a company that has established processes, and I'm speaking about buyers now, not LSPs, but this is important for LSPs to understand because they can take advantage of this, right? You have a company that has established its product, it's working whatever they're selling, whatever they're setting up, and they've established it in one region. Now imagine when you're ready to grow. Imagine when you're ready to grow. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Imagine when you're
just double checking.
Yeah, sorry, no worries. Okay, when you are ready to grow, you need to go to other markets because you've outgrown your market. Now you need to go to other languages, right? The challenge is all of your processes for all of your product have already been set up. And now all of a sudden you're at that stage where you want to grow into different markets and the expectation is, well, we just translate. And that sentence is the most and simplest thing that I always get everywhere is we just translate because it seems simple. It seems simple when full humans, only humans did it. It seemed simple when we added MT to it. It seems simple when we added neural machine, and it seems simple when we're adding LLMs. It's simpler now. It seems that it's even easier. Well, the challenge is in the middle. Different budgets lead to different adaptation of content, so on and so forth. So it's not that simple. Of course, I'm not going to go into the details of quality issues because we know what they are. I mean, LSPs deal with that every day. Customers know what they complain on. So I just want to touch very high level on where we are. We are at the challenges of the traditional step. Now, I've touched on this a bit during the conversation. The usual solution, and this is where we go now into deeper things. The usual solution is, well, I'm ready to grow. Get me a tool or an LSP that can help me grow. Throw everything at them, which is a backloaded process. It doesn't matter where the content comes from. It doesn't matter what I'm translating. I'm expecting the TMS, the LSP to do it for me. And this is where it all starts to get interesting, because you're adding a process to something that is not maybe top-notch efficient, which then will slow your efficiency. Examples of this are, as I was saying in the previous slide, different teams buying different localization tools. It happens. Now, different teams using different localization steps. So for example, let's say we buy a TMS, but we buy it within a team because our team budget doesn't let us do that. We have a challenge because other teams might not be translating equally, terminology might not be the same. We start getting into TMS while other teams do it manually. That's all known. That's all fine. The whole point here is backloaded processes are challenging because you start spending more money into fixing things. We have file types, different content types, design files going together with Word files, going together with PDFs, maybe some database content, which would be amazing, but depends. So we end up having a very reactive workflow where we translate as we go with very little strategy thinking behind it. And that leads to hard costs, hard challenges, and then, of course, the belief that, well, my TMS is the problem, or the LSP is the problem, or I don't know what's happening. And the whole point of this conversation is to speak about, well, not all the time, and nothing here is absolute. That's important to note. Not all the time, the problem is the tool you buy or the quality of it. Sometimes, actually, very many times, it is the fact that at the beginning of that process, there are things that we need to correct. And one of those things, there's others, one of those things is content creation. So when we go to that content creation, we start speaking about how it is unstructured. I mentioned different file types, different structures, old type of content types, non-centralized creation. We're going to speak about that in some of the case studies. So for example, AI made an interesting slide here with a prompt where I mentioned that I would like to show an unorganized chef with an unorganized mise en place when everything is ready, creating a very top-notch dish. It can happen. It's going to take more time of the chef. It's going to cost him more. He might use more of his resources, be the sous chef or kitchen attendants. That is the challenge because nothing was prepared. That is the problem. And when you equate that to content, it is extremely similar. More processes, more setups, more things need to be done. For you as a buyer, that means whatever LSP you're working with might charge you more for certain things, and it will engross the time it takes to do them. For you as an LSP, it might mean that some of the customers that you're serving, you cannot serve because you don't have the process to do that. Or you might go to an outside source to do that as a process, which again means more charges for you as an LSP that you pass on to the buyer usually. And if you want to see this from where it stands, if you go back to content creation, you should be able to solve it there so it goes smoothly. It's important that these things go because when we start looking at the solutions, you'll understand that we've kind of traded that backloaded process to try to appease everything. And one of the answers that I saw there in the slides was about my TMS doesn't cover it all. Yes, because there is content that doesn't cover everything. If you're a buyer, you hit that challenge, you might need to pay more and find a way to solve it. If you're an LSP that either has their homegrown CMS or you've bought a CMS, it's the same challenge. You still can't cover it all. So you end up doing either a manual refresh or going to different transformation processes. Traditionally, you would get a localization engineer to do some of the work. So that is part of the usual challenge. Now, we've gone through the challenge. This was the easy side. This is what everybody here knows. That's why, as I said, I don't expect any questions here. This is the headache. This is the everyday that we have, either as a buyer or as an LSP. Now, let's go to how we think we can solve it. And this is the gist of it, right? My belief, and this is where I see a lot of the industry going, is about content first, structured content. This has its own challenges to be applied. But the whole point here is, if you look at the challenges that I mentioned, a lot of them have to do, actually, a lot of them happen at the TMS layer, at the LSP layer, yes, but not all of them are the fault of the TMS or the LSP layer. They're actually the fault of the content layer, which is early in the cycle. There's a reason for that, and the reason is extremely simple. As I said before, localization as a strategy is usually not ingrained at a high C-suite company level, which means individual teams deal with it usually ad hoc, and after they've dealt with it ad hoc for some time, then they go into some sort of organization around it. But again, it tends to be departmental and separate. Now you see a lot in the last 3 or 4 years, you see a lot of companies going for, okay, let's do this centralized, let's buy a TMS for the whole thing. But it usually, as a generic strategy, doesn't envelop everything. So we end up getting, for example, we in a backloaded process, we say the TMS is going to solve it all. TMSs have grown to try and solve it all, but they can't. And then at some point, you as a buyer, either or as an LSP, you push towards the process that the TMS tells you, or you need to do something on the side. Rather than doing that, the answer should be create the content differently. Be sure of what your content is. Include localization strategy within content strategy, because that's going to net you. And you're going to see it in a case study in a bit, where it's very interesting how content strategy thought they had nothing to do with localization. And that's an interesting take, but it happens. I have a set of things here. I think the image is very self-explanatory, where you go into creating contents as blocks, smaller pieces of content that can be reused, that have their proper context, that are devoid of format, importantly, because formatting does challenge things. So this applies to app localization, this applies to design, marketing design, localization, so on and so forth. So devoid of content is best. And then meaningful contextual information. Examples of this, for example, if you see app development, usually you have developers creating string resources, but it is very seldom that I see proper commenting around those string resources and proper setups of why that string exists, where does it lead, what does it do. Even when development environments let you do it, even when string resources files understand commenting, developers seldomly do it because they don't recognize the importance of this for localization. That is part of the challenge. Developers will comment their code, what a function does, why does it, so on and so forth. But the very specific string resources, if they're in development hands, very seldomly get commented or contextualized. Another example of that is database entries. Let's move away from file formats. I'm not gonna go there yet. So let's imagine you have an interesting proper way of handling it. You have a CMS, this is usually for product companies. You have a proper PIM or a proper CMS, and you have your product description, your product titles, everything properly set, everything ready in the database, but not correctly tagged. As such, how do I know a title is a title? How do I know a description for a certain thing within a certain set of rules is that? I don't. And if we don't pass that traditionally to humans, they don't understand it, mistakes can happen. Interestingly enough, when we start talking about AI, the same thing happens just automatically because you are prompting, and the more information you give to that prompt, the better the prompt will give you information back. Very importantly here, this doesn't happen from night to day. This is change management at its core. You are usually asking, usually a buyer, to change the way they're doing something here, so it can then be, and it can then improve something here. Very seldomly have I seen that there's a link, or there's an understood link between general content creation between departments with localization. The answer is usually, well, just translate it and that should be fine. It is not. You would also see teams, for example, creating, and this is the thing, a lot of teams today use Figma, design teams. Figma is localization friendly. You have a lot of TMSs and tools now going for Figma connectors, which is amazing. Then is Figma really your, as a buyer, as a creator, is Figma really your content repository? Should it be? That's one of those questions that I ask here, because Figma is a design system. Does it work for maintaining your content, saying which version should be there and which not, so on and so forth? It does not. But we have gone to try to connect to Figma because that is what content creators use, rather than shaping that Figma side into the content comes from an API into Figma from a database, and then I don't need to translate in Figma. I translate at the database level. That is the level of changes that this entails, because it lets you then be more efficient, more straightforward with your content. Repeatability gets in there, reuse, so you spend less in translation. Again, remember, translation is a multiplier of your content. If you have content in one language and you translate into 10 others, you're multiplying that content. Selecting what do you want to multiply and how many times will have a high impact on your cost as a buyer, and will also let you put more volume of work with less budget for an LSP to work on. Now, these are just some of the things on content creation. I made this high level. It's important to look at it at a high level as strategy. This is difficult to implement, and that is the main challenge. This is difficult to implement specifically when you have something running for years, and now you have a monolith of a process that, for the sake of your localization being more cost efficient, you need to change. That becomes the main challenge around this. Now, when we look at how it improves localization down the line, this is where it gets interesting. Because traditionally, without looking into tooling, so on and so forth, once you have blocked content, so to speak, you can reuse it, you can change the context of those blocks and add them many, many times to different pieces. You provide context to translators. Again, traditionally, we're not talking about AI yet, but with better context, translators make better choices. Your TMS content is richer. Your translation memory gets richer by the context of the translation, so on and so forth. Of course, terminology, we haven't spoken about it, but it's there and it's implied. And with structured content, you all of a sudden have the ability to simplify your automation of processes, rather than the usual, which still exists, 7 different file types, various different tools, different exports, and then somebody or a team of people picking them up and dropping them into a platform, be it a TMS or otherwise, manually. It still happens. If not, you have a TMS connected to different places in your ecosystem, picking content up when changes happen. It works flawlessly for some type of content. It works with a lot of challenges for others. This is where that disparity happens, because there's a layer that we're going to speak about it in a bit that also needs to be thought of. You're reducing cost, of course, and time, depending on how you're translating. If you're using AI, of course, you're going to be faster. Again, AI is an accelerator, not as the main driving force. This is the whole thing. This is a process. Your driving force is the process, not the accelerator. And thinking like this now makes you, let's say, agnostic to what you're using. If you create proper structured content with proper contextual setups, proper tagging, let's say character restrictions for marketing content or character restriction for social content, so on and so forth, You don't have to have the back and forth of it didn't work, shorten it, it didn't work, shorten it, because the tools that you're using are going to do it for you on the basis of the initial information you gave them. What usually would happen is, if we look at that character restriction example I just made, traditionally you would send it for translation, tell somebody this is, I don't know, 100 characters, translator then makes an effort to do it, comes back, again, I don't like it, so on and so forth. Removing that back and forth, if you start adding AI, you have a proper tagging, then you prompt it correctly, this is the amount of characters, and then that back and forth gets a lot faster. That's the whole idea behind it. You are setting yourself up for scalability, to be able to scale with lower costs and enable LSPs to do, and TMSs to do their job more efficiently. That is the whole thing here. Now, implementing it is the interesting piece. I'll move to the next one. Yeah, implementing it is an interesting piece. This is what I'm saying. I think the image speaks for itself. This is actually the basis of it. People think that the basis of translation, when I say people, the majority of the people I speak to, usually at the customer side, go into, I need to translate, so I'm going to buy a tool. That's amazing. The tool needs to do a lot of stuff for it to be applied correctly to all of your content, or your content has been thought out correctly from the beginning to be able to be handled fully by the tool. We're speaking about the middle here, where you've been creating content for a while with a specific process without taking into account for localization, and then once you add localization, it starts to break at the seams. The whole point is creating that strategy from the beginning or before going into your localization process and getting it ready to scale. If you cannot, then what you end up with is needing to audit across the board, understanding what tools you have, how your content is created, what modules or structures you need to create. Is your tooling correct for it? One of those examples is I worked with a large company where the content has been completely in-house created on their own tooling. And they went a couple years back through a rehash of their whole tooling. What I'm saying is they used to use a standard CMS that used to work on the basis of full pages. So imagine a product company working with a CMS where their product is on websites and people can buy from the product pages, but the pages themselves were monolithic structures complete in the CMS. And they moved to a component CMS where now the pages are built in blocks. Internally for their content team, that was a win because they could do 1 or 2 blocks and reuse in over 1,500 pages. And then once you translate, it is also then multiplying that resource saving and that money saving at the localization stage. Was it easy? No. It's a large audit. It's a full change of content. It's a review. But the initial effort to do it then helps you grow scalably to what this very specific customer has grown. It's important to understand your model. Your content model is what's going to drive how you're going to build it. Not everything can follow the same content model. So you need to understand how you're creating that content and where. Maybe you're not creating the content. Maybe you are reusing content from either third parties, depending on as a customer, your type of business. That then becomes an interesting exercise in, do you want to adapt a content strategy that helps you grow with localization or not? We're going to have a case study about it in a bit. That is from the customer side. That is from the buyer side. When you speak about LSPs, this is important because this helps you go in the direction of a partnership with your customer. So there are a couple of things here. If you're an LSP, you either own a TMS that you've created or you buy a TMS of the big providers. And that comes with the same challenges that I've been saying for a while. Depending on the customer, the TMS is not going to cover it all. So you as an LSP then have to go on the sides, creating different processes and setups to appease that customers need, which works because you're charging for those services. Now imagine if instead of making a transactional back and forth, and that heavily depends on the ability and willingness of the customer to go to you as an LSP and actually engage in this type of process, you go to them and help build a content strategy that actually works for localization. It does work, just that the work stops being transactional. It's not buying an LSP and expecting it to do everything. And this is the challenge. You should be able to go there and have more consultative, more partnership approach. It happens for some of the companies, for some it doesn't. Usually a company goes through an RFP, depending on the size of the enterprise. They have multiple LSPs because the thought is, if I have multiple LSPs, I am jumping over the strategy hurdle of putting all my eggs in one basket. That is true. But with multiple LSPs, you also have multiple ways of working, which also means terminology and translation memory sharing and interdepartmental content shifts are very difficult to control. And that, I'm assuming, is one of the challenges across the board. Hence, again, this starts at your content strategy. If you serve everything the same way to multiple different TMSs, you should be, more often than not, getting the same high quality back. But if your content differs per department, per structure, per LSP that you're sending, then you get challenges. That is somewhat fixed by usually the strategy being, I'm going to use LSP A for these languages, LSP B for these languages, LSP C, D, and E for these other languages. That works to a point. But then the whole idea of a multi-LSP environment gets out of the window when one of the LSPs fails on one language and you have no solution for that language. That is part of the problem. And it all goes down to creating that localization strategy in line with how you create your content. Up till now, we've been speaking about the challenge of content creation in localization. And we've been looking at implementing a content strategy that serves for it. Now imagine, remove machine translation, remove AI, and let's go back to pure human translation. If we're in a pure human translation world, this is already sound advice, because you create the content in the way that the TMS that you're using or that the LSP you work with can handle it efficiently. So lower the amount of time, lower the costs, and hopefully lower quality issues. We haven't spoken about quality, of course, other than standard translation mistakes that happen, so on and so forth, is subjective because it depends on what you deem quality, what your style, what your tone is, what your brand is, so on and so forth. But those are all traditionally managed by style guides, terminology, so on and so forth. So I said very, very purposefully, remove AI from the equation, remove MT from the equation, and this is already sound advice for your whole localization process. That's why I say that AI is an accelerator, because once you have this as a structured, basic function of your process, then you start adding things to this. What happens today is that we add things without the process being correct. So one of the pitfalls for today, for example, for the today issue is, I want to add AI. Amazing. What do you have? PDFs. Okay. How do we handle them? You need a TMS that's able to handle them. You need that TMS transforming that file layer into something digestible by either the LLM or NMT. And then you need that brought back in the exact same way, because you usually, as a customer, want the PDF to look exactly the same in the other languages. So there's a lot of stuff that I just mentioned now that has nothing to do with the translated word within the PDF. Because if I were to send a PDF into a standard LLM, it's going to pick it up, it's going to take the text and give me the text back. Great. That doesn't work 90% of the time for customers that need a PDF back. And this is where your whole layer of things revolves around the file type I use. That's just one example. There's others. There's the currently, there's the idea of using AI for DTP, which is not a bad idea. DTP being desktop publishing, post layout processing after translation, right? It is not a bad idea. The challenge with AI being used for DTP is that you are regenerating content. As such, you need to run with the assumption that for something faster and less expensive, I might not be getting back the same image or the same structure. It's getting close, but it is not exact because you're regenerating. Hallucinations might be in the way. Your content might not be exactly what you want. So that is one of the challenges of adding AI. Now that is in a perfect world, imagine your content not being properly created, not being properly structured, and then you want to add AI. You're just adding one more complication to the mix. Does that complication net you some efficiency? Apparently, yes, because you still are going to be faster in some places with some of the content. You still will avoid the random translator mistakes like spelling, grammar, so on and so forth, because the system does it for you, and the TMSs have been doing it for you for a while. But the complexity of it goes into what do I want to do at the end. I see a bit of, it depends on, I see a bit of a question, so I'm going to go there. Depends also on how complex the design is. The design is complex. Is exactly that's the whole point. And not only that, it's not going to solve it. It will end up creating something new for you, or you will end up doing so many back and forths with whatever AI tool that you're using that it defeats the purpose. That is the whole conversation here. And you mentioned a very good point, how complex the design is. Well, going back to this idea of structured content, if you're thinking of multiplying a design to localization, maybe you don't make it as complex as it is. That's part of the thinking, that strategy. That's not easy, because maybe you as a customer do want that complex design. Maybe it just exists and it's been there for years and you cannot change it, or you don't own the department that can interact in the changing of that design, so on and so forth. So those are the challenges that hit here. You can use AI as an accelerator in many places, but it's not going to solve the layers in between. AI is very good at translating, but the layers in the back and forth of the whole process are still there to be discussed. So let's move into AI. And this is the only slide that doesn't have an AI image, just as a quip, but yeah, on purpose. So structured content, we've been there for a while by now. So what I wanted to portray from the beginning is that if you are a buyer, this is on you. You should be thinking about this, not waiting for your TMS or LLSP to tell you. Because what will happen is, if you buy a TMS, you will align to their way of processing content. And sometimes they cannot process it all, which means your teams are going to be creating sideway processes to align to the TMS that you bought. If you use an LSP, very similar, they will do some extra things for you that will either net you high quality, but maybe at higher cost, or take more time. The whole point is, this is not at the seller side. This is at you as the buyer. This is your strategy. This is your structure. LSPs and TMSs can help with this by coming in, consulting, pushing. If you're a TMS product, you usually sell and say, this is everything what we can do. And if you want something extra, I am selling you that as a consulting structure. It works. If you're an LSP, you should be doing the same. This is everything that we can do, but these extra things should do this and this and this. My view is that as an LSP, you can go in and be more proactive rather than transactional, and partner with that customer and try to get them to change their ways in certain very positive outputs in ROI. And this is all trackable. That's the important piece of it. Once you start changing it, once you go into more component oriented, you're able to track it with proper data. AI can help you there. This is where we go into how we accelerate and how we supercharge, right? First, simplest, translate with LLMs. Yeah, once I have structured content, once I have proper tag content, there are tools out there now that rather than going the traditional, which is, pick the segment up or separate new segments, pick the segment up, send it to NMT, bring it back, check if the translation memory is there, check if the terminology is correct. They simply prompt. You take the segments, you prompt to an LLM, receive something back. You can also train that model with your brand, style, and tone. Interestingly, every segment might be a prompt, or you might prompt for the whole context, depending on what LLM you're using. We at Unbabel usually prompt for full context, so that depends. There are tools out there that do this very nicely with separate models per customer. Blocks Weaver is one of those. It's a recently built tool, but it's a very interesting tool, and I would recommend you to go and check it out. Now, that is using them for translation only. As I said before, if you have format-free content coming from a database, and we haven't discussed how it comes from a database. We're going to check on that in a bit. You have tagged it correctly, you have commented it correctly. All of that can be properly picked up for a prompt to be created to translate that content with the desired style and tone in the model, and very specifics like character restriction, something else, lowering the speed that it takes the model. Of course, because it's an LLM, you're already thinking, unless there's a hallucination, that you won't have grammatical errors or any style and tone errors or anything else. That is how you start supercharging. You're now doing one of the steps, maybe, because there is still the process of do this with an LLM and then review with a human that has been working for this for a while. That is very valid. It depends on your needs of the given content. Not all content you want to review. Some content you definitely want to review. So that now depends, again, going down to the strategy that you set up. Doesn't have to do with AI, doesn't have to do with the LSP. It's the strategy of you as the buyer or the strategy of the LSP that is serving you. Of course, we go into the other details like terminology. Now you have a large swath of previously translated content. You have never looked at terminology closely, which would be strange, but it happens. You now can automatically pick up terms from it. You can set up an LLM to give you some terms. Of course, you need to have an interface. Again, there are tools that do this already, where you have more or less, rather than somebody, a human looking at it, you have automated management of terminology. Let's go into QA, again, on Babel with comment models. Others have, if you go to Hugging Face today, you will see QA models everywhere. There are tools that have their own QA models, very standard to the model. So you will have output of quality as soon as it's translated, which is amazing. Now you're supercharging your content. Now, instead of going back, checking if it's right, feedbacking, you already have an automated output of this is the quality of this according to the rules that you have set. Tools are there to help you do it. Guess what? The acceptance of that quality and how good that check is depends on how you've trained that model. And that training of that model depends on how good your initial data for training that model is. And how good that data is depends on how you structure it in the beginning. So this is where it goes. We go back at the beginning. It's a circle setup, right? And the last one, which is an interesting take, is you can generate content too. So if you have a component CMS, in some places, it's still localization, but you're now jumping over the translation piece because you might decide to take some content and repurpose it by doing a prompt to an LLM to actually to read that and transform it into a different thing in a specific language. It doesn't remove, it removes the translation layer, the word for word, but it doesn't remove the localization layer. It still needs to be checked. It still needs a QA assessment. But the difference now is the QA will be handled differently because you don't have a source and a target segment. They're different. And what you have is pure generation of content. There are tools out there that are already doing it, and it's a decision about how you want to approach it. The challenge remains the same. If you're a customer, if you're a buyer, basically, how do you trust that that content is correctly created in line with your brand and style? There are some tools to manage it. As we've said, some interesting tools to manage that generation content. But the initial piece of it is that your previously translated content used to train the model is good enough that you can start trusting it. The second part is you will add translators to review it, which is the today of the PMT. You have translators reviewing the content and it's good enough, and then it goes into training the model again. Those are just some of the ways that we can use AI to accelerate. We haven't talked about AI as a data setup for ROI. AI as a checker of what processes within can be not only automated but improved, so on and so forth. That is all there up for grasps. Important enough, how you apply it still depends on the initial conversation here, which is your content needs to be structured and set up correctly. Again, that's on you. For you to take as a buyer, for you to take the highest output of quality from this, right? The second piece to this output is not the tool that you buy And that means the TMS, so the tool that is going to be serving your localization needs, or the tools that you have your content created in, or what are you doing to create content. It also has to do with how you connect those tools. And this is where it gets interesting, because you have, as I've been saying before, you might have multiple departments working with different tools. It happens. You might have one department working with one CMS, but then they're using it differently you can have one company working with the same CMS across the board, but then each department uses it differently. There is no content governance. That does happen. Some places you don't have a tool. That's more complicated even. We're going to, again, speak about it in one of the case studies. That interoperability layer, which in localization up to a couple of years back, we really didn't speak of it. I mean, we did, but it wasn't looked as close by, because you usually had a TMS that picks up a file, you file filter, you transform, you send back to the customer. It's the customer's challenge to put it wherever they exported it from. Then you see TMS popping up with connectors. So I connect to Content AI, I connect to Kentico, I connect to WordPress, I connect to here. So it means that your content goes directly from your base to your TMS, gets translated, goes back. One of those main applications is app localization. You have localize, you have phrase, which is, where and are the masters of, connecting to GitHub, to your repositories, get string resources in and out, translate. Yes, but we did ask at the beginning, does your TMS cover all of your needs? And we're going to revisit that again. Sometimes it does not, which means you need to do things on the side. When you need to do things on the side, it usually revolves around somebody within, depending on your organization as a buyer, within your engineering team, creating some scripts, transforming some things, or you asking your LSP if they can do something about it. And it either goes into some manual process on the LSP side or some automation process on the LSP side, but you're adding variables and processes to something that should be thought of at the beginning or through the audit. It's not only about content, it's about the interoperability layer of it. How do you connect your CMS to your digital asset management, to your TMS properly and correctly? Now, I'm having this talk today with Lingo Systems. They're specialists in that. That's the whole point of Lingo Systems existing. But there's also other ways. So that when you look at interoperability, you either build it in-house, and it's important for you to control it. That's where I see it. Or you buy something that helps you out with it. Lingo Systems will create custom options for you. They have the experience to do it, but then you also have software, actually, I would say integration platforms as a service. You have Blackbird around there that, it's a simple connect A to B, have a bunch of connectors. You have Zapier, you have N8N. They're not localization oriented, but they help you with this type of automation of controlling content. Not all of them, importantly, transform your content. This is a layer of complication, because if you don't have structured content, we go back to the same challenge. If you don't have structured content, what you end up with is exports and files. And if you're going to pass them from point A to point B, that's fine. Any automation tool can do that. But if you need to transform them in the middle, you either depend on the TMS being able to handle that transformation, and they mostly do, or something in the middle, be that custom built that you do, or use out-of-the-box connectors from some of the platforms that transforms that. Adding, again, a complicated layer of transformation to content in such a way that if the content is not correctly set up, you might end up needing, or actually not getting the highest efficiency possible out of adding AI to the mix or adding any type of automated process. That is the challenge. So at a whole, if you want to look at it this way, you think of upstream process, content creation, or even content generation, and then component content setups, where you can then either a TMS or an LSP that uses a TMS be very efficient about it, and you need internally to think about your interoperability layer. On the LSP side, on the provider side, that's interesting because this is exactly what you go to your customer with, depending on the size of the customer and what it nets you on revenue. And you go back and you can have a proper consultative approach with them about how to improve. Because if you start having this type of conversations, you can improve their content strategy, thus getting closer to them and providing proper data on ROI of translations, which is exactly what we should be looking at. Today's translations are not about, am I translating correctly? And I'm a very strong proponent of what I'm going to say now. It's not about, is my quality low or high? How much content am I translating and how much time? That's all fine. But the reality is that content is being translated for a reason. So ROI, instead of being handled as time, words without errors, or amount of cost out of translation memory, so on and so forth, should be handled like, are you doing something useful with that content? As in, if I've helped you for X amount of dollars to move into market Y, after 6 months, what has been your growth in that market? And how has the translation effort helped you with it? That's ROI for a buyer of localization. Not, I've translated this amount of words for this amount of money, because that's ROI for the LSP. That's the gist, that's the separation. The LSP, the TMS will tell you, we translated this amount of words, this amount of content, this amount of things. But for the buyer, that's amazing because I know what I'm paying for. On the other hand, what has that done for me as a buyer within my company? The fact that is not, it is taught in some places, but not majorly. The fact that is not thought as proper ROI or as ROI indeed is because the localization function doesn't usually exist. It exists in some places, but doesn't usually exist at a company that's trying to grow the market. It organically appears when the need happens. And because it organically appears, if you're very good at localization and you go in and you create a team, you know what you're doing. If you're not, you grow out of the processes that are there. You just inherited a function that is maybe a plus to what you do every day. As such, you're thinking of ROI as, what is this vendor giving me, rather than what is this what this vendor is doing for me as a company. And that is, those are two very important distinctions in looking in data pickups. Right? So we've spoken about content. We've said that it's on the buyer side, very importantly. And we've said that as a buyer, you need to own that and you need to maybe spend some of the resources there. And we've said as an LSP or a platform, usually platforms go in, they sell, and then they go into, we can help you with this, that's fine. And as an LSP using a platform, you can take advantage of this and go in and propose content strategy setups and improvements. Now, let's look at some use cases. And these are, I cannot name names because of course there's a bit of an NDA in the middle, but I will share the reality of those topics, right? So this is around 3 years ago. This is a large water things vendor. This is very interesting. So marine equipment, marine equipment vendor. I've been speaking for a bit, so yeah. The challenge they have is that their content comes in PDFs. Interestingly enough, they don't control the content. It's not theirs. They buy and resell, not for all of it. Some of the content is built by them. Some of their products are built by them. But then you have specification pages, you have product pages, so on and so forth, that they're selling on their website and that they're selling through different local stores, but they have everything in PDF, or they have, right? The challenge being they don't have access to the original file creation of the PDF because the content is not theirs. So this is a very interesting example of where changing or adapting a content strategy within them worked for lowering the localization needs. Now, as I worked on that project, I can tell you that it was a bit difficult to sell to the content team the fact that they would need to adopt a PIM, a product information management system, and take those PDFs and add them to it, because the content team didn't really care. This is very important. For the content team, this was not a problem because they had their own budget. They created the content for the products that the company created, but for the products that the company did not create, they just got PDFs, put them in a folder. That's it. Why do I need the hassle? But on the other side, you had the localization team that was translating many PDFs over and over again into different languages and going into different market costs a lot of money. Also, some of the equipment wasn't actually being sold in other markets, but the approach to localization was all or nothing, as in, because my content team doesn't have the structure of what needs to be translated, I'm not following what's being sold in market, I just translate everything, this is how much market X costs me, go for it. That made, for this customer, some of the markets actually inaccessible, because they would need to translate everything, and that kind of complicates things. Our approach was, well, why don't you try to reorganize your content strategy and add a bit of tooling to it? If you add a PIM, then you can take those PDFs and put them in the PIM and take the content within and put it into blocked pieces of content within the PIM that then you can select and send when you need. Again, the localization team was very happy with this, but you have a content team that said, yeah, but the resources that I'm spending and investing here are a problem. The only way to prove that this was going to be a serious, interesting investment was to make some tests, sell the point with some 10% of the content, where we used a lower tier of a PIM to add some content, connect it with an interoperability layer to our translation platform. And then they noticed that not only can they select which pieces of equipment are going to go to which market, but also they can reuse some of the specifications of equipment in certain places, which then lowers the multiplication that translation adds to the whole content thing. It resulted in reduced time to market, because you're not translating as much content, you're deciding what to translate. You're not doing it manually, you're not sending PDFs, you're not doing post layout setups for PDFs back. What you're doing is database content that you send for translation, receive, then export, and you use as you will. The costs also went down, of course, because now you're maybe translating less content per market, but you're also translating only the content that you need. You're not wasting anything. And on top of that, I haven't added a very specific ROI on costs, because there was an initial investment in the PIM and the resource work to add that data in. So there is a tit for tat here. The important lesson from this is they didn't see as a whole company that shifting the content strategy actually would net them localization advantage. There were two teams working in parallel, that one team thought the other team, what they do is perfect, they send it for translation, bring it back, while the other team was struggling with a low-level budget, not being able to set up things correctly, and the company as a whole was being, as a buyer, suffering for it, because you cannot go to all the markets that you think you can go. This is, we're 2025, this is 3 years ago. Right now they're working on a PIM, and it works very well for them. Let's move to the next one. The next one is simpler, I would like to say, because it has to do with isolated content. This is what you usually find. This is content silos, no overall content. There is a content creation strategy, but not a content governance strategy, which meant the following. You have two teams. This is an application. This is an app that is very interesting. It is sold to companies as a B2B app, but then the users are actually B2C. They're customers within companies. So you could see how the marketing for the customers is very different than the marketing for the buyer. And that meant that the marketing team was displaced or separated from the content team, the content creation team, because the content creation team caters to individual buyers, individual users of the application, while the marketing team is very centered on B2B, selling to businesses for multiplication of users. As such, content strategy thought, well, product is product, and they sell to single users, while we, marketing, create and sell to B2B. Guess what? There's a lot of overlapping content there, but they just used to create content completely separate, which even in source language was a challenge, because you would find marketing material being somewhat different from product material within the application when it's being used. And that created some challenges within. Now, imagine then you go into localization, because now I want to go on, and this company does go into 32 languages. So you're multiplying, doubling of content separately for marketing and for B2C, for product content. And you're finding that the same challenges in source language are being replicated in target languages, where there's a discrepancy between how you say something when you're selling to the company is going to buy you versus how you say it in the product. Then you have customizations per product, per company. It's very complicated with no governance. We approached them mentioning that they should set up a governance structure, because they did have a content team and they did have a proper content creation flow and a tool. So the only difference made here was create content governance, actually make design or marketing and design, go into the already pre-approved by a consortium federated team internally, already pre-approved content that can be used for both, which meant you now stop having source content challenges and discrepancies. Of course, that took time. It's not one switch. It takes time to implement. But then you also stop multiplying your challenges across the localization piece. Also, interestingly, this one we did do some ROI. The translation costs went down around 70%, because they noticed that a lot of the content didn't need translation. A lot of the content wasn't needed in certain languages, and some content that was really needed was being translated twice. So that stopped. It lowered how much they were translating, and the issues dropped. There were, but this important thing, there were issues in source. Like the source content had issues without touching translation. There were quality issues called out, so on and so forth. So when we started picking up quality issues, because of their system, we don't know quality complaints on source language, but we know quality complaints on target, and they dropped drastically. You're reusing content. Content comes from the same source. Content is pre-approved. Terminology is the same. To be clear, I'm saying it now, and as I'm hearing myself, it seems easy. It is not. It was tough before, because you are implementing change management. You're implementing content changes. You're implementing the way process works in content creation across the board. You need to tighten the structures around it. You need to tighten the tooling, but it worked. It took some time, though. This was around, I would say, between 10 to 12 months until we started seeing some output improvements. And that is down very heavily to not being able to stop the wheel, make the changes, and run. That is actually because while the wheel is turning, you're making changes. So it takes time. This is the most important piece. If you want to implement these changes across the board, accelerate with AI, run with interoperability, you need to understand that the change starts with the buyer. And then LSPs are going to be able to do their work efficiently. TMSs are going to be able to apply what they have efficiently without you needing to spend more money on some other custom things. And if you need to create custom things, you have places to go with. Just create, because it's impossible to have everything clean and ideal. Let's be clear. But be sure to create the custom pieces and the interoperability pieces that you have with a mindset of scalability, capability. Check your beginning first. So, takeaways, and I am on time. I want to leave about 15 minutes for Q&A. So, just some very quick ways of saying it. I think it starts with content. Create content correctly. Create it thinking about what content does for you down the process, and it's going to be great. The second bullet point is the one that I think is the most important, gives this whole thing an idea. The content that you have, depending on the product that you use, is your foundation. You need to add around that to build something. You need to add interoperability, which is the scaffolding around what you build everything. And then AI is your accelerator. You can add AI to a bunch of places, but as long as the scaffolding and the foundations are correct, that AI is going to work correctly. If not, you're going to end up with very strange processes that are trying to go around what should have been fixed at the beginning. So that is it for me for this tech talk. I kind of extended a bit in certain places, but I wanted to give you some examples. And I am going to ask Kari, now to go into Q&A. We have some very interesting answers to the initial pieces, and any questions that you might have are welcome.
Great, thank you, Stefan. This was a really nice talk. Thank you for sharing your ideas and your thoughts on this really interesting topic. I would like to ask all the participants if you have any questions or if you would like to add something to the discussion. It would be best if you just pose your question in the chat here, and then we can talk about your question and your ideas. So, Stefan, while all the people now typing in the chat their questions, so this was quite enlightening what you just talked about. You also showed us some of your references, right, from your customers. Thank you for that. That's a very good idea to share that. One question from my side. I think one of the challenges is that we can talk about localization and automation on a general level, but then, as you just told from your customer side, the reality is, you see very different scenarios, how content is created, how it is used. Like, you have a product information system, you have a customer relationship management, you have content, user-generated content, for example, you have high-quality content. So there's a bunch of different content types spread over very different systems. And I think that's one point that makes it so difficult to come to a general technological solution that fits like one solution fits all. From my point of view, it would be very difficult to find that like one solution fits all. What do you think about this?
Absolutely. It's not a play in absolutes. You are right. The challenge starts how the company is created, how the buyer is created. Every different department creates different content. If there's not a centralized content strategy, that's the first step. And even when you implement a centralized content strategy, usually it happens already after the content has been created. So you need to spend a lot of effort and resources into recreating it. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you want to go on the side and the bulk of the content is already good enough. For these others, we're going to do some custom work to set it up correctly. But then, as long as that is part of a strategy that is documented and followed, you know exactly how it fits down the line, and is it going to accelerate or stump your growth across the board. The challenge is not having that strategy. That's kind of the main thing.
Mm-hmm. You emphasized that point is right. You said something like there's if you are lucky, there's a department strategy. But yeah, what do you think? How are our chances as service providers to make the companies develop a strategy on a company level?
Yeah, that's for us has been challenging too, because you usually start with a very depending on who you are, right? You, for example, Lingo Systems is the seller of the solution. So when somebody comes to you, they already need a solution. So it's kind of simpler. But when you're an LSP, this kind of isn't seen. So the problem seems to be, oh, the LSP doesn't know what they're doing, or content is there, but there is usually this transactional approach to, if I'm number 5 out of 5 LSPs, I might not want to rustle the feathers, if you know what I mean, rather than thinking of going in and having a conversation and seeing how much can I try to change them, showing with data what it's going to do down the line. But it is challenging. Like I've had some very interesting failures. I didn't want to bring failures today to the case studies, but yeah, I've had them and they're not fun, so to speak.
Okay. Marta raised her hand. Marta, you can open up your microphone.
Yeah.
We can't hear you.
Yep. Unfortunately, no.
Oh, you can write it down in the chat if you want, and then well.
Yeah. Anybody else would like to raise a question, or is there something to add here? We would like to come into a discussion with you. You're also welcome to open up your microphone and just ask your question.
Yep.
Everybody is overwhelmed by your input.
Hopefully that's it.
That was really great. I will share those slides and those questionnaire that we have seen in the beginning latest tomorrow at in our newsletter and Lingo Systems newsletter. So just feel free to share it. I copied the link in here, so you will see all the slides that we've seen today in that newsletter tomorrow.
Can you, Stefan, go over the initial slides with the questions? Yeah.
Yes, I'd love to. Wait.
Oh, there's a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's a question in the chat. Okay, I will unshare. Okay.
Yes. Nick, you wrote something?
Yeah, that's your last question is the interesting one. Can AI help here? Yeah, in some places. But it needs to be that's the challenge. You are adding AI at the source. Like once the content is created, anything that you do with AI or with anything else just restructures the format and the thing. And my advice is exactly this. If you're an LSP side, try to have a consultative approach with the customer and see how their content is created. Not every content creation process can be changed, but as long as you understand it, you can see what to do about it. Of course, in some places you won't be able to get away without formatting within the content, and that is the challenge. That actually, to be honest, doesn't stop you from doing great localization because you can set up a process around it. As long as that formatting structure and the design doesn't change, you can also automate that process. But it is important for you, either as an LSP or the provider of service, to understand that. More importantly, for your customer to understand that, and to at least kind of rain down the flexible structures around their content creation setup, so you can automate and make it repeatable. If you're able to move away from format being tied to text, that's ideal, but that's not an easy conversation. And it entirely depends on the content type. If it's an application, it depends on how those string resources are being created. Hopefully usually they're not anymore in line, but it happens. If it's a website or if it's some design content, then it depends where the content sits. So it is a conversation, and this is the whole part of it. When you ask how do you approach formatting and document level, you have a lot of rules out there to explain to customers how to format content for localization in mind. That already exists, and it's been there for years. How to best format your content for localization in mind. For example, if you use InDesign, proper text boxes, centralize your set up content in text boxes rather than in flowing text, so on and so forth. But my approach is a bit different than that. If you use InDesign, pick up your data from a database. That's kind of the different format free. That is not an easy change, but that is definitely a conversation to be had.
Okay, great.
There's another. Oh, thank you for your answer.
Mm-hmm.
There are more questions. What are the prospects of getting away from segment level translation?
I think it depends on the one of the slides that I had said it's not a switch. You're asking about content model now. I think segment level translation still has its uses, but if you have flowing text and you're using an LLM, you have a better approach at prompting and sending the whole context throughout. Now, would I recommend moving away from segment level translation? Not necessarily. That entirely depends on the content. Because if you move away from segment level translation, and let's define segment, not translation segment, let's call it blocks, you are then moving away from reusability of content, which then might end up doing a higher cost across the board. So it entirely depends on the model and content strategy of who you're speaking to. And that is the important piece. You need to decide your model and see for that content if it works better for flowing text or not.
Okay. I think Marta just joined again the call. Marta,
Yes.
if you would like to ask your question. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Some tech problems as usual. No, I just actually wanted to unmute myself, thought it would be easier than the chat and to explain also. So thank you very much, first of all, Stevan. The presentation was super insightful and I think it was a great information. Circling back to the slide about with the case study of the PIM usage and introduction of PIM, right? And I come from the LSP background, so I'm on the vendor side here. From experience, I would actually maybe even take it a step further and say that it's not only about implementing a PIM or a CSM, but actually implementing one that also takes localization into account, right? Because there are different systems out there, and we can see that a lot of the times, even if the customer is already using one of them, a lot of the times there is still this human component where we have different people creating content, putting content into these systems. And if they are not designed well and those sort of security checks are not automated to then allow for easier localization, like, for example, character restriction, these things often get overlooked if there is dozens of people working on the content. So that's sort of a step further, that not only look at what kind of PIM or CSM or any other content governance platform you use, but actually which one and whether it does take localization into account and whether those security checks are in there, right?
Absolutely. Everything you said, 100% agree. The only thing with my case study here is it was at a high level more about how content is versus what the tool does. But what you just said is an important piece of it. I like the words you used. You said ready for localization or something. I have two monikers here. It's either localization friendly or localization aware. And a lot of tools want to say that they're localization friendly when they're just localization aware. And a lot of tools want to say that they're localization aware where they have nothing. And the simple examples of that might be a tool tells you that they export an XLIF, but the XLIF is very bare bones, doesn't bring any context to it, nothing. So you send it to a TMS and that's it. Or the tools will tell you, oh, we do localization, here's an XML, multilingual XML. So these kind of things are challenging. And absolutely, as you said, selecting the right tool will go a long way with what you have. The challenge in there is, because this did happen with that specific customer, is making it clear that the selection criteria needs to include localization as one of the bullet points at the strategy level. But because you might have content teams selecting their tool on the basis of what they need without looking at localization at all. So two things, as you said, localization friendly, and also tying into your interoperability layer as a customer. And more importantly, if you're an LSP and you're inside the conversation, tying into your interoperability layer as much as you can. So consultative approach all the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
So great, Stefan. Thank you again. It was a very nice input that you gave to the audience today. I think we are now running out of time,
yeah.
Stefan, right?
Yeah, we
yes,
are.
Yes, we do. Always with Stevan.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you, Stevan. I honestly, I really like the talk, and we can continue that conversation. Feel free to reach out to Stevan, and also feel free to reach out to us. And you can, yeah, I think, Stevan, what is your preferred way to be contacted?
People can reach out to Stefan at Lingo Systems, or you can reach out to me through LinkedIn. No issues about it, and we can have a further conversation about any of the topics. Yeah.
That's good. Perfect. Yeah, and as I said before, feel free to subscribe to the LinkedIn newsletter that I will do all the further communication with other tech talks, and also like the slides that Stevan shared will be seen and will be shown in the newsletter then.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
I
Bye.
loved it.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Lovely. Awesome.
Very nice.
Perfect. Let me just
So.
stop the recording.